Hi, I just got home, well, about half an hour ago. I had a shower first, but tonight I saw Opeth live in concert in Auckland at the, what's it called? The Trusts Arena, I think it's called, which was kind of controversial in itself because when the tickets first went on sale, they went on sale about a year ago. It was November last year. They originally were playing at the Auckland Town Hall, which was kind of the perfect venue for a band like Opeth in many different ways. And it's just a nicer, better venue anyway. But they sold a lot of tickets quite quickly, and the town hall is not massive. And so I don't actually know if they sold out the town hall. It was close to selling out maybe. And so the promoter said, oh, let's upgrade it. Cha-ching. And so they moved it out to West Auckland to the Truss Arena, which is basically, well, not basically, it is a basketball arena, a big tin shed where they play basketball games. And so it's not well suited to concerts. And a lot of people talked about the sound before the concert. They said, the sound there is shit. And maybe it is. It didn't sound that terrible to me. It was sounded a bit muddy at the beginning and kind of seemed to improve as the concert went along. In saying that, for the first time ever, I wore earplugs. You know, like disposable earplugs. What do you call them? Is that what you call them? Air protection to a concert. And I wish I'd done it sooner, because it really doesn't affect your enjoyment of the sound at all. And it protects your hearing. Like, you know, usually when you come out of a concert, everything's muffled and ringing for a good kind of 12 hours, if not more. And I don't have that, or no more than I would usually have, at least. So that was, I'm glad I did that. But anyway, I should probably, so this is the armband. Obviously we don't get physical tickets anymore, it's all on your phone, but this is the wristband, so I try to write the name of the band is so that when I keep it, it's like a keepsake. Just showing, I've showed a lot of these before, but what I have in the way of Opeth CDs, before I took out the show. So, Last Will and Testament, the most recent, Encauda Venenum, extended edition, which has got the English and Swedish versions, and as well as a bonus disc, I believe. Yes. Sorceress, also special edition, which has got a bonus disc with some extra songs like The Ward and Spring 1975. And then, I've talked about this before, that I went through a phase about 20-ish years ago, 15 years ago, where I got rid of a lot of my CDs, and the ones that I did keep, I threw away the jewel cases and just kept the disc, and in this case, with Opeth, the booklet. So trying to go in order. Orchid, Morning Rise, My Arms, Your Hearse. Obviously, I don't need to get it out, do I? I can just show you like that. Still Life, which is over there. Blackwater Park, the first Opeth album I ever got. That's the original one I got, which would have been back about 2001. I think this came out in 2000, Blackwater Park. And I got it about, was it 99? Regardless, I got it around the very, very early 2000s, 2001, 2002, I got it. That is Deliverance, which came out in, because I believe it's coming up to some sort of anniversary for this. When was this released? 2002. So, okay, let's not forget about that. So quite soon after Blackwater Park, Deliverance. I'm lost here. Damnation, Zoop, Ghost Reveries, Heritage, kind of the start of the new era of Opeth, and Watershed. Sorry, I'm not showing that, am I? Watershed. And then on the back, do I have any? Oh, you found the Watershed bonus disc, which has got rehearsal tapes, Watershed 5.1 mix, and some other bits and pieces like Derelict Hands and Bridge of Sight. Anyway, my point in showing all that, I'll maybe go back in there, is that at one point in time I was a pretty huge Opeth fan. As you can see there, I have all of their albums except for Pale Communion, which is around the period where my kind of fandom dissipated a little bit. Well, Pale Communion would have been about 2014, I believe. 13, 14. And yeah, I just kind of stopped listening to them a bit. I wasn't as interested in what they were releasing. Was listening to a lot of it, different stuff. I kind of, my metal phase kind of wound down a little bit around then. Not wound down, but I was listening to other things. Anyway, and saying that, I own most of the most recent albums as well. So, the concert. The shit thing about it, starting with the shit thing, is that, and I don't know whose idea this was. Who could imagine this would be a good idea? It was primarily seated. So like I said, it's a big basketball arena. Imagine, a basketball court, and they have the seats, the tiered seating on the side of the court. So, if a court is kind of, like a rectangle, you're on the sides, you've got these sides. I'm not showing anything with my hands here. They've got tiered seating, like stadium type seating, bleachers maybe you'd call. And then they also have bleachers at either end, like behind where the basketball hoops would be. But those were retracted, and the stage was at one end of the arena where seating would be, and the other end. And this is just, so they'd sold tickets for the tiered seating on the side, which was in a few levels, and seated for the area. I need a piece of paper to kind of show this, because I'm not really describing it very well. This maybe. So this is the where the basketball court was, and this is the stage, and there was seating here and here, so you're kind of watching side on, which is where I was sitting. About, my original seat was about here, very close to the stage on a kind of angle, right? A very good view of the stage. And then they had this area here, about the 3/4 or 2/3 of this court area was seated, like in foldable seats. What do you want to call them? Like folding chairs. And then this section here, like I think the sound desk was probably about here, and this section here was a standing GA section where that was kind of caged in. So people were standing behind the seated thing, and this was not tiered. They were standing on the same level, but they could see because these people were seated. But what a horrible setup. For some shows, that would be great, minus the standing shit at the back, because that just didn't make sense. But seated concerts absolutely have their place. I went to Tom York this time last year, roughly, and that was seated, and it fit. I didn't feel at any stage of that concert, this doesn't feel right. But as soon as, sorry, my voice kind of went there. As soon as they started playing the first track, which was Paragraph 1 from Last Will and Testament, it felt unnatural, the atmosphere of the crowd, because they're playing this, even though that this stage of their career, they much more into the prog, but they reintroduced some death metal growls and stuff in this new album, and certainly their older stuff was death metal-esque, progressive death metal or progressive metal, however you want to call it. And it's just people sitting there, maybe banging their heads, but it just felt off, and it really affected the kind of the vibe of the concert. And I can't imagine a band would opt for that, structure of crowd seating, whatever you want to call it. As the concert progressed, people, you know, kind of like some people stood up, and then the security would come around and tell them to sit down, and then like one guy was getting out of his seat and was like fucking headbanging like a maniac, and they came and told him. Then some people tried to sneak up to the front, right in front of the chairs, and then I saw security come. And then for the last two songs, which were Ghost of Perdition and Deliverance, which was the encore, it was like en masse. People just came and kind of like ran up to the front. So they kind of stood in the section to the side and then in front of the seats, which kind of blocked my view, but I didn't give a shit because I stood up as well. Everyone kind of stood up. I preferred people had done that at the very beginning, to be honest. The last two songs felt like a proper concert, you know, it completely changed the atmosphere and the vibe. And it was like, I felt like the band could feel that as well. Now, I'm not saying it was a bad show. I'm kind of like talking a bit about, you know, saying the vibe or the atmosphere was off or it felt disconnected. I'm not saying it was a bad show. I enjoyed it overall. They played well. There were parts of songs I really enjoyed. But it just would have been so much better if they had, you know, done it like a typical hard rock heavy metal concert, where it should have been GA standing for the majority of the thing, and then had seating around the side on the tiered seating. You know, of course they would have had to change bits and pieces. Kind of some of the seating they wouldn't have been able to use because people wouldn't be able to see, but most of the seating they could have used. And if people wanted seated, they could have. But I would guess some of those seated tickets near the front rows, like people were right up the front, right under the front of the stage sitting, those tickets were pretty expensive. So maybe that's why, maybe as from a economic point of view, it works out more profit or something if they sell in that with that structure. But it's like I've seen a lot of metal bands come here and not do that. So I don't know if it was the band's call. Did the band decide these things? Or was it the promoter entirely? Because when this first was announced, I wrote something on the Opeth, when was it? I can't remember where I asked the question, but I asked the question, like, we were fans from America and Europe and stuff, and said, at recent Opeth concerts in the last couple of years, have they been seated? And it was a mix. Some said yes, but actually most of them said no. So it's not as though like it's a rule that they have to have seated shows. So I'd say overall, it made the show lesser than it could have been. This is my second time seeing them. I saw them a long time ago, 19 years ago in 2006. And when I saw them in 2006, that was during the Ghost Reveries tour. I was at the peak of my fandom. Opeth were my favorite band at that time, and I was kind of obsessed with them. And so it's kind of, there's a few times in my life where those things have crossed, because so often I'll love a band and then they won't tour anywhere where I am. And so I never get a chance to see them when I'm really into them. Maybe like years later I get to see them and I'm like kind of not as much. Or just they don't tour at all and I don't get it, the opportunities never arises at all. But the three times I can remember seeing a band where I was super into them was Soundgarden in 1996, 97, Korn in 1999, which was just after Follow the Leader had come out, and Opeth in 2006, where my fandom for them had been building through the early 2000s, and by the time Gross Reveries came out, I was like a super fan. And I saw them, and they played the St. James Theatre in Auckland, which was a perfect venue for them. It's not really a going concern at the moment, so they couldn't play there. But and I met them afterwards. They came out the back after the show had finished. I met Michael. I got his autograph. Had a pretty decent conversation with Peter Lindgren, the ex-guitarist. I met Martin Mendez. And so that was like a huge thing as well, because I was like kind of I was much younger. To be honest, I wouldn't really, it wouldn't appeal to me nowadays meeting them, but not just because I'm older, and it would just be kind of awkward. It was kind of awkward meeting them back then, but you're a kid, well not a kid, I wasn't a kid, I was like 24, 23, 24-ish, something, 25. I was in my 20s, and so it wasn't as awkward. You know, just like a dork going, oh, hi guys. What tuning did you use for that song? So yeah, and that's part of it as well, and that I'm older now, and so and I talked about this earlier this week when I was doing that Soundgarden video, that so much of enjoyment of live shows is about your age, and how at certain ages you can enjoy things on a much more visceral level. Whereas when I'm older, like, you know, I was kind of sitting next to people who I didn't know tonight, and that kind of annoyed me. Not annoyed me, because what you can't avoid that is a goddamn concert, but I'm very sensitive to, and this is going to sound like, I don't know, I won't a little bit of the R word, but I'm very sensitive to smells, people's perfumes or colognes, or lack of, you know, sometimes obviously body odor is terrible, but sometimes perfume can be worse than body odor. And it's like kind of like a real assault on my senses dealing with that. And I sound like, I know what that sounds like. It sounds like one of those people who's like, you hear them like ultra sensitive people, and complain about things that you're just like, Jesus Christ, get a grip. I'm not saying I can't go out and enjoy things. I push through it. But at the same time, those things wouldn't have bothered me 20 years ago like they do now. So they started off the show with Paragraph 1, like I said, from Last Will and Testament, which is a brilliant, great opener, the best song on that album. With the next two songs, Master's Apprentice from Deliverance, sounded quite muddy. Then they played Leper Affinity from Blackwater Park, which is an amazing song. And one particular, it sounded a little bit muddy as well, you know, because he's like really doing the death growl in those songs, and there's like a lot of kind of quite intricate guitar parts, and part of it was lost. I don't know, maybe it was a mix, because I actually saw at one point Michael was signaling to the sound desk to increase the volume of Mendes and Frederick's, the bass and the guitar, and Frederick's guitar did sound quite low in the mix in those first three songs. The part in Leper Affinity, that first solo, was kind of felt a bit buried in the mix, couldn't really hear it very well. But one particular part of that song that was amazing and kind of suited the sitting part, where if you listen to Leper Affinity, which is track 1 on Blackwater Park if you're curious, the outro is this very beautiful piano piece, which I think was played by Stephen Wilson from Porcupine Tree in the original recording. And Joachim, the current keyboardist, played it, and it's all the, you know, everything else stops, no guitar, no drums, just him playing this very beautiful piano kind of outro coda type thing. And it had this red light, this red kind of swirling light behind while he was playing it, and it was like one of those kind of moments in a live show that kind of like was perfect. And it was because it was very quiet and atmospheric, and that suited the seated environment, you know, because it was like that's needs kind of like a rapt attention, a seated, quiet absorption of the music, as opposed to the rest of Leper Affinity, which is a death metal song for all intents and purposes. Sitting down and listening to that didn't feel natural. Then they moved on. Then he did like and Michael does this. He did this when I saw him 20 years ago. He talks a lot. in between the songs, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I quite enjoy it. He's very funny. He's very witty. Just, you know, I can't remember what he was talking about. He talked about meeting Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac and Rod Stewart, and what they had done in Auckland. They'd been in Auckland for a few. I know they'd been here for at least since the weekend, last weekend, I think, because the drummer Walt, or Walteri, or how he pronounced his name, was posting pictures on his Instagram. They went to Rainy Toto, and well, he did. I don't know if the whole band was with him, but it sounds like they were. They went to the zoo apparently, and their luggage was lost, and they were staying in Grafton in Auckland apparently. But yeah, he spoke. It felt like for a good kind of 5-10 minutes he was chatting. But then they went into another song from Last Will and Testament, paragraph 7. Then Devil's Orchard from Heritage, which was awesome. Then To Rid the Disease, another song that suited the seated situation. That was from Damnation, the Damnation album, which was at the time something completely different for the band. That was like an acoustic, distorted guitars, non-growl vocals album. And at the time, that was like a real departure. And in years to come, we see that was the direction they were moving anyway. But that song there, that kind of suited the seated environment. Then they played The Grand Conjuration, which really, that's the kind of song that you need a crowd in there going mental. And they couldn't. One guy tried to get up. I could see, like a real bogan. He was up trying to like headbang. And if you were sitting right behind him, it would have been annoying as shit, because this guy's standing directly in front of you, whipping his hair back in front in your face. But security came over, and you could see they were telling him to sit there, and he was like, "Why? How can I sit down?" But they made him sit down. Then they played paragraph 3. Then Demon of the Fall, which again, there aren't many songs that make you want to get up and jump around and headbang than Demon of the Fall. It's like a song specially designed for that, but what can you do? Then Ghost of Perdition, the floodgates open. As soon as Ghost of Perdition started, you know, the very quiet guitars, bling, bling, and then straight into the Ghost of Mother growled vocal, like waves of people started rushing forward towards the stage. And the security, I think, just gave up. They couldn't. Once it gets past like a certain tipping point, they can't get that many people back. So, and then once it's like a cascade. Once people see other people doing it, then other people do it, and it's just like. And so by that song, I stood up because the view was blocked in my seat, and so I kind of moved so I wasn't blocking anyone's view behind me. Then they went off and got an encore call and came out for Deliverance, and by that stage most people who were seated were now standing and up, and there was quite a decent, mosh pit going in front of the stage, and like it felt like an heavy metal concert. It completely changed the vibe. It was quite illuminating for me, because I'd never been to a seated heavy metal concert before, obviously, and that's why it felt so unnatural. And feeling the difference between the songs where people weren't standing, when they were standing, it was like a complete vibe change of the whole place. And like I said, it seemed like the band felt it as well. Like the band, of course, the band feeds off the energy of the crowd. So you can't imagine the band would be wanting a seated situation, because it would be hard, I imagine. It would be hard playing that kind of music to a bunch of people sitting. It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, I'm glad I went. It wasn't cheap. It was the most expensive concert I've ever paid for one ticket, because I went by myself because my wife is away. Usually my wife is my concert buddy. No one I know is going to come to a progressive death metal concert. Even people who might like that music, who I know, wouldn't come. And so I just bought one ticket, and the ticket was to over $200, or 210 or something New Zealand dollars, which is about 105 American dollars. I don't know if that sounds expensive to you, but for me, that's pretty expensive. You know, in the last 5 years, I've been seeing Tom York, Mr. Bungle, the Melvins, Emperor, and Men I Trust, and they were all far less than that. Far less. Or Tom York was up 170, I think, something like that. But the other three I mentioned were all far less, about half that. But I'm glad I went, because I know if I didn't go, I would have regretted it. And the thing is, tomorrow night, there's another show that I was really tossing up whether to go to. And that was Blood Incantation, together with Secret Chiefs 3, which is Trey Spruance's band. Trey from Mr. Bungle and Faith No More at one stage. If my wife was here, I absolutely would have gone, because she could have looked after my son. But because she's away, there's no one to look after my son. Tonight, my parents are looking after my son. My son is staying at his grandparents, my parents. But I can't ask them to look after him 2 days in a row. I feel guilty doing that. And so I am not going. And the tickets are only $70 for that. $70 to see Blood Incantation and Secret Chiefs 3. They're playing a tiny venue, the double whammy. Well, not tiny, but it's a hell of a lot smaller than the Trust Arena. It'd be a few hundred capacity. But I would have liked to have gone to see them, because that new Blood Incantation album, was it Stargate? I've been listening to that a lot over the last, when it came out. It came out about a year ago, and the last year I've been listening to that album a lot. It's kind of like my gym album when I go to the gym. And Secret Chiefs 3 is just, I haven't listened to all this stuff, but the stuff I have listened to of theirs I've really enjoyed. And it's just something, I've never seen a band like that before, so I would have been really interested to see them live. And Trey Spruance is an amazing guitarist, and it would have been cool to see him again. I saw him last year, obviously, with Mr. Bungle, but it would have been cool to see him again. But yeah, and then the other bands coming is Tool. They're playing next weekend. I would have gone to them. If I'd got a ticket, I would have gone. I would have asked my parents again, because that's kind of a week removed. But all the general admission standing tickets sold out in 10 minutes. And all that was left with mental prices. Okay, sorry. The Blood Incantation album is Absolute Elsewhere. The song is Stargate. The Tool tickets left were $300-400 tickets. And they were seated tickets. And they're playing Spark Arena. They're playing 2 shows. And like I said, if I'd got, I would have paid around $100 or $150 for a standing GA ticket. And then the other band playing on Wednesday coming is Metallica. Jeez, it's a lot of metal, isn't it? Opeth, Blood Incantation, Metallica, and Tool all in the space of a week. Metallica are playing at Eden Park, which is a stadium, like a proper stadium, the biggest stadium in New Zealand, like where the All Blacks play and shit. And the tickets were just stupid. Like the tickets were released around the same time as the Opeth tickets last year, so I was kind of deciding whether I was going to see Metallica or Opeth. I really have no interest in seeing a stadium show of any band, and the only tickets I could really afford were nosebleed seats. They were more than the Opeth tickets. They were, I think, the cheapest Metallica tickets were $250, right up the top of the stands at the back. So all you're doing is watching the screen. You know, you can't see shit of the stadium. And I've seen Metallica twice before. I've seen them at the Supertop, which is a much smaller venue. That was back in 1998, so I kind of always have that. And then I saw them at a stadium show in Korea in 2013, but I was kind of down in this standing part. So I've seen Tool as well. So seen Tool, seen Metallica, so I think, well, like, I'm not missing anything there. Would like to have seen Blood Incantation, but you can't see everything, can you? Other concerts coming up, Garbage is playing Auckland Town Hall next month. I wouldn't mind seeing them. I'm a big fan of their first album, their self-titled album, especially the song Vow. That song was kind of like one of the songs of my youth. But I don't like the rest of their songs, the rest of their albums enough. The tickets are about $120. The other one is, I've got much longer to decide on this unless tickets sell out, which they might do, is Suzanne Vega. Now, I'm a massive fan of Solitude Standing. And I did a video about that and I talked about how much I love that album from 1987. Her stuff that she did after that, I'm not as much of a fan of. So the tickets, can't remember how much they are. They're in the hundreds. And if I went to that, I would go with my wife because I think she would enjoy Suzanne Vega. I'm kind of two minds of that because will she play enough of the Solitude Standing album to make me enjoy it? I'm not sure. I see what other bands, I see if other bands come, because I only have limited funds to be spending on concerts. Basically, I go to 1 or 2 concerts a year because I'm an old man and I'm not rich. But we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens between then and now. But yeah. So anyway, that was my review, but not really a review, of Opeth 2025 in Auckland. It was a good show. Would have been a great show if it was not seated. So if anyone who has any sort of influence over this ever watches this video, which they won't, please don't do that again. Please don't make a heavy metal show seated. I know, like for example, when they released the Heritage album, they did a tour and they toured specifically just the Heritage material, I believe. And in that situation, I can see seated, or the Damnation album. But you can't do a heavy metal show where the primarily, like about 75% of the material they played was, you would class as heavy metal music, if not death metal music. Doing that seated, it's like hamstringing yourself as a band in your performance. So yeah. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you for watching.